The winter of 1901 in Boston was vicious. Snow fell in sheets so thick that gaslights vanished behind white curtains. But inside the brownstone mansion at 42 Beacon Hill, the silence was thicker than any storm. Eleanor Ashford was celebrated. A doll maker of extraordinary talent, her porcelain creations graced the parlors of Vanderbilts and Rockefellers. Governors commissioned her work. Newspapers called her the Michelangelo of miniature life, until the morning of January 14th, when the Boston Police Department received a telegram from the Ashford estate housekeeper. 3 children of prominent families had arrived for private fittings the week prior. None had returned home. What the officers found in the workshop defied explanation. The tools were clean, the kiln was cold, the children's coats hung on brass hooks, still buttoned. But on the workbench sat 3 new dolls, each one dressed in fabrics that matched the missing children's clothing exactly. Each one with eyes the precise shade of the vanished. Because in Eleanor Ashford's workshop, the dolls were not made from porcelain anymore. They were made from something that had once breathed. But before we unseal the archives on this case, leave your comment below. What country and city are you listening from? And what exact time of day or night? Does the darkness feel thickest where you are? Your answer helps us know just how far these stories are reaching. What you are about to hear comes from Case File 17-B of the Boston Metropolitan Police Archives, declassified in 1979 under the Freedom of Information Act. The original report was sealed by order of Governor Winthrop Murray Crane himself. The reason given was public hysteria. The real reason was protection of Boston's wealthiest bloodlines. Eleanor Ashford was 53 years old in 1901. She had been widowed for 12 years after her husband, a textile magnate, died under circumstances the coroner ruled as accidental drowning. She had no children. Her only companions were her dolls. Her reputation was immaculate. The society pages described her studio as a cathedral of craftsmanship. Mothers of the Gilded Age elite competed for appointments. To own an Ashford doll was to possess a small work of immortality. Her dolls did not decay. They did not crack. They seemed almost alive. The 3 missing children were Charlotte Pemberton, age 9, Thomas Cabot, age 8, and Margaret Lowell, age 7. All 3 belonged to families whose names were etched into Boston's founding. Their fathers owned railroads, shipping fleets, and banks. Their mothers hosted charity galas at the Harvard Club. On January 7, 1901, each child had been delivered by private carriage to 42 Beacon Hill. Eleanor Ashford had sent personal invitations requesting the children sit for custom portrait dolls. It was an honor few families refused. By January 13th, none had returned. The police arrived at dawn on the 14th. The housekeeper, a woman named Ruth Calloway, met them at the door. She was trembling. She said she had not seen Miss Ashford since the previous evening. She said the house felt wrong. Detective Lieutenant Howard Pierce led the search. He was a rational man, a veteran of 20 years on the force. He did not believe in ghosts or superstition. But when he opened the door to Eleanor Ashford's workshop, his hands began to shake. The workshop was pristine, not a trace of dust, not a single tool out of place. The floor had been swept clean. The windows were draped in heavy velvet curtains that blocked the winter light. Gas lamps burned low, casting the room in amber shadow. On the central workbench sat 3 dolls. Each was approximately 2 feet tall. Each wore miniature clothing of exquisite detail, a blue velvet dress with lace collar, a gray wool suit with brass buttons, a white pinafore with embroidered roses. The fabrics were identical to the outfits the missing children had worn when they arrived, but it was the faces that stopped Detective Pierce cold. The dolls had human eyes, not painted porcelain, not glass. Real eyes that caught the gaslight and seemed to follow movement. The skin was not ceramic. It had texture, pores, fine hairs along the jawline. The lips were parted slightly, as if caught mid-breath. Pierce ordered his men to search the house. They found Eleanor Ashford in the bedroom on the 3rd floor. She was seated in a rocking chair facing the window. She wore a black morning dress. Her hands were folded in her lap. She did not move when the officers entered. She was dead. The physician who examined her body estimated she had been deceased for at least 18 hours. Cause of death was determined to be cardiac arrest. There were no signs of violence, no indication of poison. Her expression was peaceful, but her eyes were missing, removed with surgical precision. The sockets were clean, bloodless, as if the extraction had been performed post-mortem by someone with anatomical knowledge. The search of the mansion took 6 hours. Officers combed every room, every closet, every corner of the cellar. They found no trace of the 3 children, no hidden chambers, no bodies, no blood, only the dolls. Detective Pierce made the decision to seize them as evidence. When his men attempted to lift the first doll from the workbench, Officer Daniel Frost recoiled. He swore under oath later that the doll's chest had moved, that he had felt warmth through the fabric. The dolls were transported to the police headquarters on Pemberton Square. They were locked in the evidence vault. Within 48 hours, 3 officers assigned to guard duty requested immediate transfer. One claimed he heard crying from inside the vault. Another said the dolls had changed position overnight. The third refused to speak about what he had seen. On January 17th, the case was removed from Detective Pierce's jurisdiction. A telegram arrived from the office of the governor. The investigation was to be transferred to a special committee composed of representatives from the 3 families involved. The official reason given was sensitivity to the grief of the victims' parents. The real reason was discovered decades later in Governor Crane's personal correspondence. The families had threatened to withdraw funding from his re-election campaign. They demanded the case be buried. The alternative was a public scandal that would destroy Boston's reputation as the cultural capital of America. The dolls were never examined by forensic experts. The bodies of the children were never found. Eleanor Ashford was buried in Mount Auburn Cemetery without autopsy. The death certificate listed natural causes. The workshop at 42 Beacon Hill was sealed and sold to a private buyer who demolished it within the year. Detective Pierce was reassigned to Harbor Patrol. He retired in 1903. In his private journals, discovered after his death in 1928, he wrote a single entry about the case. It read, "They did not make those dolls to remember the children. They made the children into the dolls." But the story does not end with the cover-up, because in the spring of 1901, 3 months after the disappearances, a private investigator named Samuel Holt was hired by Charlotte Pemberton's grandmother. The old woman refused to accept the official explanation. She paid Holt $5,000 to find the truth. Holt was thorough. He interviewed Ruth Calloway, the housekeeper, who had been dismissed by the Ashford estate lawyers and given a severance payment on the condition of permanent silence. She violated that agreement in exchange for $200. What she told Holt changed the nature of the investigation entirely. Ruth Calloway had worked for Eleanor Ashford for 8 years. She described her employer as kind but distant, a woman who spoke more to her dolls than to living people. But in the autumn of 1900, something had shifted. Eleanor began receiving visitors late at night. Always the same man, a physician named Dr. Ambrose Thorne. He carried a black leather medical bag and stayed for hours in the locked workshop. Ruth heard sounds she could not explain, mechanical whirring, the hiss of steam, low chanting in a language she did not recognize. One night in early December, Ruth entered the workshop after Dr. Thorne had left. She found Eleanor standing over a doll that had not been there before. The doll was life-sized, nearly 4 feet tall. It wore the clothing of a young girl. Its face was incomplete, half-formed, as if the skin had not yet set. Eleanor turned to Ruth and smiled. She said, "We are so close now. We have almost perfected the process." Samuel Holt's investigation led him to Dr. Ambrose Thorne. Finding the man proved difficult. He was not listed in the Boston Medical Directory. He held no position at Massachusetts General Hospital or any other reputable institution. His name appeared in no public records. Holt eventually traced him through shipping manifests. Dr. Thorne had imported medical equipment from Germany and France throughout the year 1900. Embalming apparatus, chemical preservatives, surgical instruments designed for anatomical preservation. The shipments were addressed to a warehouse in the South End, near the docks. The warehouse was leased under a false name. When Holt gained entry in late March, he found it abandoned, but not empty. The interior had been converted into a laboratory. Examination tables lined the walls. Glass cabinets held rows of specimen jars containing organs suspended in amber fluid. A massive ceramic kiln dominated the center of the room, large enough to hold a human body, and on the back wall, pinned like insects in a collection, were dozens of photographs. Children, all of them between the ages of 6 and 10. All dressed in formal clothing, all posed stiffly as if sitting for portraits. Beneath each photograph was a handwritten notation. Dates, measurements, chemical formulas, and a single word repeated again and again: successful. Holt counted 43 photographs. Only 3 matched the missing Pemberton, Cabot, and Lowell children. The others were unknown. He took the photographs as evidence and brought them to the Boston police. Detective Pierce examined them and went pale. He recognized 2 of the faces. They belonged to children who had been reported missing over the previous 3 years. Cases that had been closed as runaways or accidental drownings. Pierce demanded the investigation be reopened. His superior refused. The order came from higher up. The case was closed. The photographs were confiscated. Samuel Holt was warned that further inquiry would result in charges of obstruction and trespassing. But Holt was not deterred. He continued his search for Dr. Ambrose Thorne. He traced the man's history through property records and medical school registries. What he found was a pattern of deception that stretched back decades. Dr. Thorne had studied medicine in Vienna in the 1870s. He'd been expelled from the university for conducting unauthorized experiments on cadavers. His research focused on preservation of human tissue through chemical immersion and heat treatment. He believed the human form could be rendered immortal if properly processed. He had moved to Paris, where he worked briefly at the Académie de Médecine. He was dismissed after bodies went missing from the morgue. He surfaced in London in 1885, practicing under a different name. He was arrested for grave robbing, but escaped custody before trial. He arrived in Boston in 1898. He established himself as a private physician, catering to wealthy families who valued discretion. He treated ailments that required silence, addictions, venereal diseases, conditions that would ruin reputations if made public. Samuel Holt discovered the connection between Dr. Thorne and Eleanor Ashford in the records of the Boston Public Library. In 1889, Eleanor's husband, William Ashford, had died under suspicious circumstances. The official report stated he drowned while sailing alone off Cape Cod. His body was recovered 3 days later, but a private letter from Eleanor to her sister, found among estate papers, told a different story. William had been suffering from a wasting illness. Consumption, the doctors claimed. He had become skeletal, bedridden. Eleanor wrote that she could not bear to watch him fade. She wrote that she had found a doctor who promised a different kind of preservation. The letter was dated 2 weeks before William's death. It mentioned no name, but the handwriting matched Dr. Thorne's signature on the warehouse lease. Holt theorized that Eleanor had commissioned Thorne to preserve her husband's body. The process had failed. William had died, but something in that failure had sparked an obsession in Eleanor. If she could not save the man she loved, perhaps she could perfect the method. Perhaps she could create life that would never decay. Her dolls became the laboratory. Over the next 12 years, Eleanor refined her craft. She moved beyond porcelain and wax. She began experimenting with organic materials, animal hides treated with chemicals, glass eyes replaced with taxidermied specimens. The dolls became more realistic, more lifelike. But they were still imitations. Until Dr. Thorne returned to her in 1900 with a proposal. He had perfected his preservation technique. He could now treat living tissue in such a way that it would cease aging while maintaining flexibility and appearance. The process required immersion in a chemical bath, followed by controlled exposure to extreme heat that would seal the cells in a permanent state. But the process had one requirement. The subject had to be alive when it began. Eleanor understood immediately. Her dolls could finally be perfect, not replicas, not imitations. Real children transformed into eternal works of art, beautiful, unchanging, hers forever. The wealthy families of Boston provided the perfect supply. They trusted Eleanor. They sent their children willingly. And when those children vanished, the families had too much to lose to demand the truth. Charlotte Pemberton, Thomas Cabot, Margaret Lowell. They were not the first. They were simply the last before Eleanor's heart gave out. Samuel Holt compiled his findings into a report. He delivered it to the Boston District Attorney's office in April of 1901. The district attorney read it, thanked Holt for his service, and ordered the report destroyed. Holt was paid his fee. He was told to leave Boston and never return. He complied. He moved to New York and died in 1909. His widow found the duplicate copy of his report hidden in their attic. She attempted to publish it. No newspaper would touch it. The investigation reached a dead end. Dr. Ambrose Thorne had vanished completely. No forwarding address, no passport records, no death certificate. He had evaporated like morning fog. But in June of 1901, a discovery reignited the case. A fisherman working the waters near Deer Island found a steamer trunk washed ashore. The lock was corroded. The wood was swollen with seawater. Inside were medical instruments, surgical scalpels, bone saws, syringes filled with a crystallized amber substance, and a leather journal bound in black morocco. The journal belonged to Dr. Thorne. The entries spanned 3 years. They detailed experiments conducted on 47 subjects, children acquired through Eleanor Ashford's workshop. The notes were clinical, dispassionate. Each child was referred to by number, not name. Subject 14, Subject 29, Subject 43. The process was described in meticulous detail. First, the child was sedated with chloroform, then immersed in a chemical solution Thorne called fixative alpha. The solution contained formaldehyde, glycerin, and a compound he had synthesized from arsenic and mercury. The immersion lasted 72 hours. After immersion, the body was placed in the kiln. The temperature was raised gradually to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. At this heat, the fixative alpha bonded with cellular tissue, creating a state Thorne described as suspended animation. The skin remained supple. The eyes retained moisture. The body ceased all biological function but maintained the appearance of life. The final step was the most disturbing. Thorne would remove the brain through the nasal cavity, replacing it with a mixture of wax and ground glass. This prevented decay from within. The skull was then sealed. The child was dressed, posed, and delivered to Eleanor as raw material for her art. The journal contained a final entry dated January 12, 1901, 2 days before the police discovered the dolls. It read, "Eleanor has become unstable. She speaks to the specimens as if they can hear her. She insists they are alive. She claims subject 45 blinked during the final positioning. I fear she knows too much. I fear she will confess. The work must continue elsewhere. I leave tonight for Providence. The orphanages there ask fewer questions." The trunk was traced to a ferry that had departed Boston Harbor on January 13th. Passenger manifests listed a Dr. A. Crane traveling to Providence, Rhode Island. But no one matching Thorne's description ever arrived. Port authorities in Providence had no record of his disembarkation. The prevailing theory was that Thorne had thrown himself overboard mid-voyage. Guilt, madness, fear of capture. The ocean had claimed him as it claimed all evidence. But Samuel Holt's widow believed otherwise. In letters to her sister, she wrote that her husband had confided a darker suspicion before his death. He believed Dr. Thorne was still alive, still working, still perfecting his method, and he believed that someone in Boston's elite circles knew exactly where Thorne had gone. In August of 1901, a breakthrough arrived from an unexpected source. A reporter for the Boston Globe named Catherine Mills had been investigating the case independently. She had connections Samuel Holt did not. Her father was a Massachusetts state senator. She had access to records sealed from public view. Mills discovered something in the probate files of Eleanor Ashford's estate. A beneficiary listed in the will. A trust established for the ongoing care of what the document described as Eleanor's collection. The trust was funded with $50,000, an enormous sum. The trustee was listed as Reginald Cabot, the same family name as Thomas Cabot, one of the missing children. Mills attempted to interview Reginald Cabot at his estate in Brookline. She was turned away at the gate by armed guards. She sent letters. They were returned unopened. She petitioned the courts for access to the trust documents. Her petition was denied by a judge who refused to provide explanation. On September 4th, Catherine Mills was found dead in her apartment on Commonwealth Avenue. The coroner ruled it suicide by laudanum overdose. Her family disputed this finding. Catherine had been in good health, good spirits. She had spoken of breaking the story of her career. Her notebooks were missing. Her files on the Ashford case had been removed from her desk at the Globe. The editors claimed she had taken them home. Her landlord claimed he saw two men in dark coats leaving her building the night she died. No investigation was conducted. The case was closed within 48 hours. But Catherine Mills had been careful. She had made copies. She had hidden them with her younger sister, a schoolteacher named Margaret. After Catherine's death, Margaret retrieved the files and read them in secret. What she found was a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Boston society. The trust established by Eleanor Ashford was not for preservation of dolls. It was payment for silence. Reginald Cabot had not lost his son. He had given his son willingly. In exchange, Dr. Thorne had promised something Reginald wanted desperately. His daughter, Elizabeth Cabot, had died of scarlet fever in 1897. She had been 9 years old. The grief had destroyed Reginald's wife, who spent her remaining years in McLean Asylum. Reginald could not accept the loss. Dr. Thorne offered him a bargain. He would create a perfect replica of Elizabeth using his preservation process, but he needed a subject of similar age and build. He needed Thomas. Reginald agreed. He delivered his son to Eleanor Ashford's workshop in December of 1900. 1 week later, he received a doll that looked exactly like his daughter. It sat in his parlor for the next 30 years. Catherine Mills had uncovered evidence that 2 other families had made similar arrangements. The Pembertons, the Lowells. Each had lost a child years earlier to illness or accident. Each had been approached by Dr. Thorne with the same offer. Trade one child for the eternal preservation of another. Margaret Mills sat on this information for 3 months. She was terrified. Her sister had been murdered for pursuing this story. But in December of 1901, something happened that forced her hand. A 4th child vanished. The daughter of a shipping magnate named Harrison Webb disappeared from her boarding school in Cambridge. Her name was Alice Webb. She was 8 years old. The school reported she had been collected by a private carriage sent by her father, but Harrison Webb claimed he had sent no carriage. The police investigation went nowhere. Margaret Mills knew why. The pattern was repeating. She took her sister's files to the offices of the Boston Herald, a rival newspaper willing to print what the Globe would not. The story ran on Christmas Day, 1901. The headline read, "The Dollmaker's Bargain, How Boston's Elite traded their children for art. The reaction was immediate and violent. Harrison Webb filed a lawsuit for defamation. The Herald's editor was arrested on charges of criminal libel. Margaret Mills received death threats delivered to her home, but the story had been printed. Thousands had read it. The truth was loose, and then came the confession that changed everything. On January 3, 1902, exactly 1 year after the original disappearances, Reginald Cabot walked into Boston Police Headquarters. He was accompanied by his attorney. He requested to speak to Detective Pierce. Pierce had been reassigned, but he was summoned. He sat across from Cabot in an interrogation room and listened as the man unburdened himself. Cabot admitted everything: the arrangement with Dr. Thorne, the sacrifice of his son, Thomas, the doll that now sat in his home, dressed in his dead daughter's clothing. But he revealed something else. Something that explained why the conspiracy had survived so long. Dr. Thorne had not acted alone. He had been funded by an organization, a collective of Boston's wealthiest families who believed they had found a way to defeat death itself. They called themselves the Preservation Society. The society had been meeting in secret since 1895. Their goal was to advance Thorne's research until it could be applied not just to children, but to themselves. They believed aging could be stopped, that human bodies could be rendered immortal through chemical treatment and careful heating. They were willing to sacrifice anything to achieve this. Eleanor Ashford had been a member. So had the Pembertons, the Lowells, the Webbs, at least 15 families in total. They had provided Dr. Thorne with funding, laboratory space, and most importantly, test subjects. Children from their own bloodlines or from families desperate enough to accept payment in exchange for silence. The 3 dolls found in Eleanor's workshop were not the end of the experiments. They were the culmination. Thorne had finally perfected the process. He had proven that human beings could be preserved in a state that mimicked life indefinitely. But Eleanor had broken the agreement. Her guilt had consumed her. She had intended to confess everything to the authorities. The society could not allow this. They had arranged her death, made it appear natural, removed her eyes post-mortem as a warning to any other members who considered betrayal. Reginald Cabot's confession should have destroyed the Preservation Society. Detective Pierce arrested him immediately. Warrants were issued for the other families Cabot had named. Police raided estates across Beacon Hill and Brookline. They found nothing. The dolls had been removed, the laboratories dismantled, the records burned. Every member of the society denied knowledge of any conspiracy. Their lawyers were the best in Massachusetts. Within 1 week, all charges were dropped due to lack of physical evidence. Reginald Cabot recanted his confession. He claimed temporary insanity brought on by grief. His attorney argued he had been manipulated by the press. A judge agreed. Cabot was committed to McLean Asylum for psychiatric evaluation. He died there 6 months later. The official cause was pneumonia. Margaret Mills fled Boston. The Herald retracted her story and issued a public apology. The editor was released from jail on the condition that no further articles on the case would be published. Detective Pierce was forced into early retirement. His pension was cut. He spent his final years writing letters to federal authorities, begging them to investigate. None ever responded. Dr. Ambrose Thorne was never found. But reports surfaced over the following decades of a physician matching his description working in cities across America. New Orleans in 1905, Chicago in 1912, San Francisco in 1920. Always near orphanages, always near the wealthy. Always gone before anyone could verify his identity. The 3 dolls that had been locked in the police evidence vault vanished in 1903. The vault was found open one morning. No signs of forced entry. The officer on duty claimed he remembered locking it the night before. He was dismissed for incompetence. Years later, collectors of antique dolls reported acquiring pieces that matched the description of the Ashford specimens. Dolls with disturbingly realistic features. Eyes that seemed to track movement. Skin that felt warm to the touch. These dolls commanded prices in the tens of thousands. Their provenance was always obscured. In 1928, a private collector in Newport purchased what was advertised as an original Eleanor Ashford masterwork. The doll depicted a young girl in a blue velvet dress. The collector displayed it in her drawing room. Guests remarked on its unsettling realism. One evening, the collector's granddaughter, aged 7, approached the doll. She stared at it for several minutes. Then she turned to her grandmother and said, "She told me her name is Charlotte. She says she has been waiting a very long time." The collector donated the doll to a museum the following day. The museum refused it. She attempted to destroy it by fire. The doll would not burn. She buried it in her garden. 3 days later, it was found sitting on her front porch, undamaged. The collector suffered a stroke that same week. She died without regaining consciousness. The doll disappeared again. The brownstone at 42 Beacon Hill, where Eleanor Ashford conducted her work, was demolished in 1902. A new building stands there now. Luxury condominiums. The residents report no disturbances. But the public garden, 2 blocks away, has a peculiar reputation. Tourists and locals alike report seeing children playing near the pond at dusk. Always 3 of them, always wearing clothing from another era. Blue velvet, grey wool, white pinafore. When approached, the children vanish. Not by running, they simply cease to be visible, as if they were never there at all. The Boston Police Archives still contain Case File 17-B. It remains sealed. Requests for access under the Freedom of Information Act are denied on grounds of protecting the privacy of the deceased. The families involved maintain legal trusts that continue to pay for this protection. In 1979, when portions of the file were declassified, 3 photographs were released. They showed the interior of Eleanor Ashford's workshop, the dolls on the workbench. But in each photograph, if examined closely under magnification, something impossible is visible. The dolls' chests are rising, falling, as if breathing. No medical examiner ever confirmed what Dr. Thorne claimed to achieve. No scientific journal published his findings. No university acknowledged his methods. But the question remains unanswered by any rational investigation. Where are the children? The official conclusion is that they were murdered and their bodies disposed of in a manner never discovered. The dolls were simply dolls, masterworks of disturbing craftsmanship, but nothing more. But those who have seen the photographs, those who have read the unsealed portions of the file, those who have walked past 42 Beacon Hill at twilight and heard the sound of a music box playing from a building that no longer exists, they know the truth is worse than murder. Because Eleanor Ashford did not kill those children. She made them immortal.